Hi, good evening. This is Vicki Partlow, and this is my video introduction for AEP 855. I live in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I am been married for 11 years to my husband, Alex. We are raising our 16-year-old nephew, and we have a dachshund named Darcy, who's almost 10 years old, and she is extremely spoiled. I am an early childhood special education teacher for Stafford County Schools. Currently, I have a morning class that has 7 students in it, 4 students with individual education plans, and 2 students who are considered peer models. And then I have a new peer model that's going to be starting in the next week or so. In the afternoon, I typically see children in their natural environment. So what that could mean is a student can be seen in their home, or in the daycare setting, or any other setting that the parent considers they're a natural environment for that child, someplace that they're always at, like the daycare or even grandma's house or things of that nature. We do natural environments for those students who really don't require a classroom setting to work on goals, or who are already in classroom settings, such as a daycare setting or a private preschool setting, and they don't need to come to our preschool to have their IEP goals worked on, because we can work on them within the classroom environment that they're already in and that they're familiar with. One of my favorite jobs I ever did was working for the military. This is very, very dear to my heart. And it about broke when my husband got a job in DC and we had to move. But we did live in Germany for 6 years right after we first got married. I actually was the sponsor, or I was the person who got us to Germany. I worked as a contractor for the Department of the Army as an early childhood special educator for their Birth to 3 program called EDIS, or Educational Developmental Intervention Services Program. And we were, for 2 years, stationed in Landstuhl, Germany. And I saw children on the base or on the economy, whose parents worked at any number of the military bases within the Kaiser Slautern area. I also actually was really kind of cool. I got to see a child 3 hours away. We had one American family that worked on a British base that was on the kind of on the border of Belgium and Germany, and so I got to see a child up there once a month. So that was pretty cool to be on a British base. However, the base I worked on, one of the bases I worked on, Ramstein, was considered a NATO base. So I worked with Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, foreign nationals, and also other military men and women from different countries in the surrounding area. We moved back to Kentucky for a year, and then I picked up another contract to work for in the Vilseck-Grafenwohr area in Germany. And after a year, I accepted a position to work for the Department of Defense Schools as a special education assessor. That job, I was there for 3 years. And my main duty was to assess children in the preschool through 12th grades, possibly for special education needs. And it was kind of interesting to me to still have to have initial referrals for students that were in the high school levels, simply really kind of based on the transient life of a military family. Sometimes things just always don't get transferred from base to base, or from working overseas to going to the United States and coming back overseas. So sometimes things get lost. So I actually assessed quite a number of students in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grades who still had never been through the special education process before. So that was a pretty interesting thing to do as part of my position. Well, I also did that. I was a sponsor for our student council for our elementary school, which was a pretty fun thing. We actually was the first time we did elections. So kids had to write campaign slogans. They had to write a speech. They had to have a platform, and they had to record themselves, which was video cast to the entire school. And then the grades got to vote. So that was a pretty cool thing that we did in the teaching the kids about the electoral process and such. My education is quite quite diverse. I'm actually a jack of all trades. I've done a lot of things in my life, from waitressing in a truck stop to working as a physical therapy pool assistant. So I worked with special needs students or children in centers that needed pool therapy. But I hold a bachelor's of science degree in communication disorders. And then went to school at Eastern Kentucky University, where I received a part of my I received a Master's of Arts in Special Education, Early Childhood Special Ed. From then, I also did a Master's in Library and Media Science when I was overseas, so it was all online. And I'm currently working on my educational leadership degree with Fort Hays. And so this is my 5th class that I am taking. So I wrote this in my reflection, but I found this to be kind of a challenging, these questions are challenging for me because I realized just really how little I really understood about the political process and the effects in the schools, really because I think of the different areas and jobs. I did not always work in public schools. I've worked in private schools. I've worked Head Start, over the years, different kinds of positions. So I feel like somewhere along the line, I've kind of missed out on a few things. So question 1 asked, why do politics influence schools, but did not necessarily move school leaders to take action based on these politics? And, our federal government established what we call the United States Department of Education in 1967. And at that time, the federal government left it to the individual states to kind of make decisions regarding their schools. So they really did not get very involved with what the states wanted for their school districts. But as the years went by, it became more apparent that maybe the federal government might need to step in here or there. So one of the very first specific political actions that kind of occurred in education reform was the Title I funding. This kind of inserted the federal government into the state's ability to kind of make decisions regarding their own schools. So like Title I, it actually came about because of the poverty levels and the connection between those levels and education, student achievement. So Title I basically came about so that schools could have extra funding to work with these children. Teachers become involved in implementing new policies, but they actually don't necessarily see themselves as political entities because our focus really is on educating children. So we don't see ourselves as political activists for change. Question 2 talked about why did standards focused on outcomes and such. So, outcomes are essentially things that we put in place to reach those specific goals. And in our political climate of a school system, they really wanted to require schools to really be accountable, and school boards to be accountable for the improvement in their schools. So there was this kind of shift to outcome-based accountability, because the focus on specific outcomes. Teaching has become more about students meeting these goals and these outcomes than actual teaching what students really need. Instead of relying on teachers and their ability to know what our students need, a lot of times now that they teach to the standards, teach to the outcomes, those goals that they want to see implemented. And furthermore, school boards, really do have a hard time letting go of the control that we as professionals in the field of teaching kind of need in order to reach these outcomes. Question 3 kind of talked about, why did standards evolve to explicitly call for school leaders' direct action? Accountability is kind of the issue here. School districts really need to show how students are achieving. And so through the standards and outcomes, districts were able to use data to help show student achievement. And, however, as we move towards the 21st century, we are really focusing really on those results through assessment and testing than we are on the students themselves. Question 4, why should leaders become political activists on behalf of their students and their families? Well, an educational leader is really charged with leading their staff, their students, and the community, invoking those changes that will help strengthen overall student achievement. However, so many students face challenges that can really hinder their success. And we need to be advocates for those kids that in order so that they can too, even despite the many things that are going on in their lives, can achieve. School leaders are, involved with families, and they kind of really understand and know their community and their students' challenges, far better than more distant policymakers. And guidance, such as our Standard 2 of the NELP standards, also call for leaders to be those advocates for ethical and legal decisions. So we really need to, work on finding out what it is that our students really need and work towards those. And we also need to speak up for those rights of those students so that we can have the best outcomes in regards of student achievement. Question 5, why do politics surrounding educational policies provide the strongest connection between what we feel and do? The political climate will always have issues pertaining to education as its platform. Sometimes these decisions are not always the decisions that I think best meet the needs of students and their families. So as educational leaders, we really have the hard job of following through with policies that may not necessarily align with the needs of our specific students. I find it unfortunate, but I do not believe that there will ever be a time when educational leaders at the school level will be allowed to kind of analyze those specific needs of their school and be allowed to implement those changes that might be in direct opposition to the regulations, the policies, and laws that we have been interjected by state and federal government. Each school district has needs that are unique to their own community, and I think that policymakers often forget about that because they are not necessarily involved with that specific community. I think Representative Mark Takano, he kind of talked about in an interview in 2005 that we as teachers really need to understand the politics that kind of surround our profession. We really need to understand what it is that what they're doing that is driving educational reform now. I also agree with him, I think his name was Ross Brenneman, when he wrote that many teachers do not view themselves as political advocates. I know I never have thought of myself as a political advocate. Um, and again, this is something I need to improve in myself. Teachers, where we are, whether we like it or not, part of that political process, and understanding how politics plays an important part of our schools is something that, as a future educational leader, really needs to. Is really something that I really need to be knowledgeable about. So it's this class, and talking about politics and educational reform and things of that nature is very important, because again, like I said in the beginning, I don't feel this is an area of strength for me. One of a quote that I really enjoyed was that the challenge of leadership is to be strong but not rude, to be kind but not weak, to be bold but not a bully, to be thoughtful but not lazy, to be humble but not timid, and to be proud but not arrogant, have humor but without folly. I think that's essential to remember as a leader, that we are put in a position to guide and mold other people and to help them become stronger and to become leaders in our field.